welcome. So we're here and we're doing this thing, and this thing is Harry Potter Abridged. We're back and we're doing it. This is episode numero. Oh shit! What's the Spanish number? The SS, also known as 16. In the book that's called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And this chapter is entitled Through the Trapdoor. And so this is the longest chapter to date, and maybe the longest chapter in this book, if I'm not mistaken. It's the penultimate chapter, which means that there's only one more after this one, is what that means, if you didn't know. So yeah, things things are gonna escalate. Things are coming to a head, if you will. So yeah, we're just gonna dive in, because it ain't a short chapter. So let's see what we can do with that. Anyway, so we ended the last chapter with let's see, what did we end the last chapter with? Well, we ended the last chapter with Harry finding out, basically from Firenze, that the cloaked figure that he saw in the forest, in the Forbidden Forest, was likely Voldemort in some state. There's still some details to be revealed on that front, but nonetheless, that's the gist of what was learned. And also, Harry got his invisibility cloak back. Because, as I've said before, Dumbledore sees all, or at least a lot of all. A lot of all? Sure. You get the idea. Anyway, and so now it's exam time, which, of course, there, and this isn't the first, okay, many times, if I'm not mistaken, or at least a few times, several times, something like that. Exams come up around the time that all the shit's coming to a head, which of course creates this like juxtaposition between learning what you're supposed to learn in magic school and also fighting the dark forces in the real world. Which it's interesting, but it's kind of funny because it's like she likes to create disruption in the academic process by having shit go awry, and in this particular case it's not actually as big of a deal because they actually do just take their exams. They're not interrupted or anything like that, but there's this whole thing lingering, especially for Harry, because Harry right now at this point in the first book, Harry's the one that's the most concerned about and worried about this whole Voldemort thing, because it really wasn't much of a Voldemort thing to be concerned about until we get to the chapter that we just finished in the last episode. So, yeah. And the other thing is that well, let's see. Let me make sure I'm not getting. Yeah. This is on the first page. Okay, good. Harry's scar is starting to hurt on a more frequent basis, and this is something that ever since his trip into the forest, when it started to hurt, when he saw Voldemort, or the cloaked figure that was supposedly Voldemort, and so now that's kind of a constant reminder, and it's that's something to bother you. That's worrisome. That's troublesome. Yeah, and the chapter begins with just kind of a basic description of some of the things about the exams, the the special quills that are anti-cheating, which I don't know exactly what that means. I guess it could detect if you were copying off your neighbor's exam somehow. I don't know. Whatever, it's magic. It's magic, man. It's cool. Don't worry about it. And they have practical exams, and they have to do things. They have to make a pineapple tap dance across a desk. They have to turn a mouse into a snuff box. And by the way, I it's funny because I saw the word snuff box. I mean, and it's been in this book obviously the whole time, and I've kind of just glossed over it and not really thought about what it means. Because I knew what it sounded like, and it turns out what it sounded like was actually correct. Snuff is a form of tobacco, a particularly gross form of tobacco, in my opinion. But then again, all tobacco is fairly gross, in my opinion. But nonetheless, yeah, a snuff box was apparently like a really fancy ornamental box to put your fucking snuff in. So there's that. Let's see. And of course, Snape set them to well, to just sort of okay. They had to remember how to make a forgetfulness potion. That's strictly just so that those words can be in that sentence. I know it is, and that's okay. That's cool. And then yeah, the whole pain in his forehead thing, the scar is hurting. And his nightmare, the recurring nightmare that Harry has that started when he was, as you may remember, back in the early part of the book, he would have a dream that just sort of had a flash of green light, and that was kind of it. And now, and like it's progressed as he's learned a little bit by little bit. Well, first of all, you know, he got to see his parents in the mirror, so now he can imagine them being murdered in his dream, and that's, you know, obviously not pleasant. And then, so now, the new version of the nightmare is now that it has a hooded figure with blood dripping. So it's, you know, bad dreams for our hero. And you know, as a result of the fact that it's Harry who has these dreams and this scar hurting and all of these things, again, as I said, he's the one who's really worried the most about Voldemort in this whole situation, whereas, you know, Ron and Hermione don't seem to be as concerned about the stone being stolen and all of that, because as Hermione pointed out, you know, in her estimation, and I mean, and it's not just her estimation, actually. It has been said widely in the wizarding world, and of course Hermione's read all the books, so she knows that what people think is that that Dumbledore is the only wizard that Voldemort ever feared. So in her mind, as long as Dumbledore's around, which means, you know, and he's the headmaster, so he's obviously around, that everybody's safe. And there's some logic to that, but of course there's always holes in most logic. So, you know, especially when it comes to situations that have variables, you know. So anyway, I mean, and it's not that Voldemort doesn't scare Ron and Hermione. It's just that they don't have the scar pain. They don't have the dream. So yeah. Anyway, somehow we happen to get a mention of the history of magic final because, you know, why not? Let's see. And then we get that sort of a recurring theme here after exams, with Hermione wanting to talk about them and Ron not wanting to talk about them, and Hermione talking about how easy they were, and Ron just kind of wanting to barf. We get the juxtaposition of those two and their reactions to things a lot, of course. Let's see. And so they're finally done, and Ron's just like, finally, no more of this bullshit. And now they've got like a week of basically free time before they find out about their exam results, which is, it's got to be kind of nice. I mean, the Hogwarts grounds are open to them, and they don't have to study anymore, so they don't really have any responsibilities. They're kids. They get to just enjoy life, except that, of course, in this particular situation, Harry can't really relax. Anyway, so he brings up the scar thing to the other two, and of course Hermione's like, go to the hospital wing, and Harry's like, I'm not sick. I think this is a warning, it means danger's coming. Which, okay, kind of right there. But yeah, so Ron kind of reiterates what Hermione said before about Dumbledore and everybody being safe, and we managed to get a little dig in on Neville. Poor Neville. While also sort of some praise of Hagrid, because Ron is like, we don't think, there's no evidence that Snape has found a way to get past Fluffy, and Neville will play Quidditch for England before Hagrid lets Dumbledore down. Which, mostly accurate look at the picture. Anyway, and so while they're sitting out there, and I think this happens maybe more often than we even realize. I have to kind of like pay attention as we continue, but Harry sees an owl come in. Which of course, obviously, in theory, any owl could be just carrying any random message, but the particular timing of this is interesting because this owl comes in. Well, you'll see in a minute why it's interesting, but it's bringing a message to the school, and Harry reminisces that Hagrid was the only one who ever sent him letters, which is, another thing about how Hagrid is awesome, because he thinks about things like that. But and he's like, yeah, Hagrid would never tell anyone how to get past Fluffy, but... And Harry has a brainwave, if you will, an epiphany, perhaps. And so he gets up, and they're all like, "Wait a minute, what are you doing, dude? We're like, this is chill time. Do not interrupt chill time." But of course, they follow him anyway, and Harry starts running off towards Hagrid's hut, and he starts putting some twos and some twos together, and they start making other things, connections, if you will. And he's like, so Hagrid wanted a dragon, and lo and behold, somebody shows up in Hogsmeade with a dragon egg. And, if they're not supposed to be bred, how many people do you think really running around with those? So, anyway, they get to Hagrid's place, and I don't know that the other two are... They're maybe starting to catch on to what Harry's doing, but Harry's on a mission at this point. So, And Hagrid's like, hey, what's up, everybody? You want something to drink? And Ron's like, yeah. And Harry's like, nah, listen, I got to ask you some shit. First of all, the guy you got the dragon egg from, Norbert's egg, what did that guy look like? And Hagrid's like, didn't take his cloak off. Not a big deal. It's the Hogshead. People do shit like that. And they're all like, oh, God. Great. The other two are catching on now. And so Harry starts quizzing Hagrid on like what the conversation was about with the guy he won the dragon egg from, and he's like, did he ask you about Hogwarts? And he's like, yeah, probably. I told him I was the gamekeeper. Told him about some of the creatures, blah 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 blah. And so he's like, yeah, I got this dragon egg, but I want to make sure you can handle it. And that's when Hagrid gets into discussing Fluffy, and Harry asks Hagrid if the stranger seemed interested in Fluffy, and of course Hagrid sometimes is just, I mean, he just looks at the obvious, and I mean, whatever. But he's like, yeah, of course. How many three-headed dogs do you come across? Of course he was interested in Fluffy, which is a legitimate point. But, and so he's like, Hagrid's like, yeah, so I tell him, Fluffy's no big deal. If you know how to calm him down, you just play him a bit of music and he goes straight off to sleep. And of course... And this might actually be the first time in the books. It happens in the movies, as I mentioned, a lot, especially the first movie. But this is maybe the first time in the books. Maybe not. I can't remember now if it was phrased exactly like this. But where Hagrid actually says, shouldn't have told you that. Forget I said it. And then they run off. And he's like, hey, where you going? And so they run back up to the school, and Harry's like, all right, we got to go to Dumbledore. This is ridiculous. Hagrid told this person how to get past Fluffy, and it was probably Snape or it was Voldemort under that cloak. And so, yeah. And then they run into McGonagall before they can figure out what to do, because they're like, all right, well, how do you... Because they've never been to Dumbledore's office/study before. This is their first year at Hogwarts. They've had no reason to. So they're like, and then McGonagall shows up. And, of course, it's suspicious for them to be inside because it's, the day after or the end of exams and they have free time and it's nice outside. So, of course, it's suspicious for especially the three of them together to be inside. So it's just like, what's this all about? You guys. You fucking guys. Which they actually later on make a play on in the movies, if I remember correctly, where, well, anyway. Basically where it's like, Ron's like, yeah, I don't know how it's always the three of us either, but it is. Anyway. So they go ahead and say, well, we wanted to see Professor Dumbledore. And, of course, that's fishy because students don't often ask to see the headmaster. That's not just something you do very often, probably at any school. Usually, if you're going to see the headmaster, it's because you've been sent there and it's not a good thing. So they're inside on an off day, and they're like, we want to see the headmaster. And, of course, that's like red flag raising all over the place. So, anyway, and she's like, well, what do you want to see him about? And Harry's like, it's sort of secret. And that's, like, probably the worst thing he could say. Anyway, McGonagall's like, well... For your information, Dumbledore just left. He's got to go to the ministry, and he's had an urgent call, which, ding, 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 that owl that Harry just saw, like, a little earlier coming into the school was most likely this message. And and probably didn't come from the ministry or from London, and probably was actually sent from like the forest or something, for all we know. But anyway, more on that in the next episode. Anyway, and so they're kind of like in disbelief, like he's gone now. But they're like, but this is important. And well, Harry's like, well, all right, fine. I'll tell you why it's important then. This is about the Philosopher's Stone. And McGonagall, who was actually carrying books, by the way, when they saw her, drops them, which is a good plot device. But McGonagall, like 3 books later, would probably just be like levitating those books in front of her, and she wouldn't drop them. Or if she did drop them, she'd pick them back up magically. But it's the first book, and it's a good it's a good physical gag to have them be dropped when she's carrying them, to show how surprised she is that Harry and Ron and Hermione know about the Philosopher's Stone in the first fucking place, not to mention that they just came in to discuss it with Dumbledore. So yeah, there's like levels of shock going off in her brain, like whoa, what? And they're like, we know somebody's going to steal it. And actually, Harry almost says Snape. He's like, somebody's gonna try and steal the stone. And McGonagall is, experiencing a mixture of shock and suspicion, it says. And she's like, yeah, Dumbledore will be back tomorrow. I don't know why you know about this shit, but it's protected and it can't be stolen. And they try to protest, and she's not having that shit. So, and she's like, yeah, go back outside. And they're like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. But they don't say that. They just don't. So, yeah, Harry's like, well, that's it then. Dumbledore's gone. Snape's going down the trapdoor tonight, because, it's still Snape, of course. And so they're still standing in a corridor or in the entrance hall discussing this, which is, well, let's just say unwise. And in the midst of that, Snape shows up. And he's like, again, with the whole, what are you doing? You shouldn't be inside on a day like this. That's totally not my Snape voice. I just don't really have a very good Snape voice. So, whatever. But anyway, yeah. And they're like, well, see, And Snape's all like, you want to be more careful. Hanging around like this, people will think you're up to something. There's an incredibly long pause in the movie version of that, by the way. It's like longer than what I just did. Anyway, and of course he threatens that Griffin, he mentions that Gryffindor really can't afford to lose any more points, can they? As if at this point that's what, anybody's concerned about. But whatever. And so he leaves. And so it's time to whip up a plan, And so they're going to have Hermione stake out the staff room to keep an eye on Snape. And when Hermione asks why her, Ron is like, well, duh, you're the model student. You can say that you're waiting to see Flitwick. And then he makes does a good impersonation of her voice, apparently. And anyway, it's funny, but then Hermione's like, well, okay, fine, shut up, but you're right, I'll do that. And then Harry's like, well, me and Ron will head up to the door by Fluffy, because, that's where we're supposed to be anyway. Never mind the fact that they've, been in trouble already and that's like a forbidden place to be. But whatever. But they go there, and no sooner do they get there than McGonagall shows up again. And now she's pissed. Like, she was shocked and suspicious before. Now she's pissed, and she's like, so, you think that, if somebody was trying to steal this fucking thing, that you guys would be that extra line of defense that'll keep it from happening? And so she's like, yeah, if I hear that you've been anywhere near here again, I'll take 50 more points from Gryffindor. And apparently Ron reacts in some kind of way because she says, yes, Weasley, from my own house. So Harry and Ron have no choice but to go back to the common room, and they're like, well, at least Hermione's... Oh, and Hermione comes back in, and she's like, yeah, Snape came out and asked me what I was up to, and I told him I was waiting on Flitwick, so he got Flitwick, and then that's that, and who knows where Snape went, because I had to talk to Flitwick. So here's where we get to that point where the main decision is made, and Harry's like, well, that's it. I'm going down that fucking trapdoor, and I'm gonna try to get the stone first. And they're like, no, don't, no. And Hermione's like, you'll be expelled. And that's when we get Harry, like, fucking gets pissed. And he's like, I don't care about that. So what? Like, if Snape gets the stone, Voldemort comes back, and he's horrible. You've read about it. You've heard about it. You know what he's like. You know what his reign of terror was all about. So... fuck school, fuck expulsion, fuck all that shit. Points don't matter. Like, no, we have, like, I'm stopping him. Or at least I'm gonna try. And we get, I don't mean to laugh, but it's just a line that is repeated by Harry several times throughout the series. Voldemort killed my parents. Which, to be fair, he fucking did. So, anyway, and Harry's like, I'll use the invisibility cloak. Fortunately, I got it back. And that's when Ron's like, but will it cover all three of us? And Harry's like, all what? And that's, of course... right after Ron and Hermione, disabused Harry about this idea, they're like, but if you're going, you're not going alone. And Hermione even says, how do you think you'd get to the stone without us? Which, yes, how indeed, because especially with Hermione. Although I will say that the way this whole situation plays out, Ron ends up being quite valuable as well. But in general, Hermione is the day saver in a lot of situations that involve Harry. And Harry's like, but you'll be expelled too if we get caught. Like, I just got done saying that I don't care because I don't. But, you guys. And Hermione's like, well, let me let you in on a little secret. When I went down to see Flitwick earlier... I found out that I got 112% on my exam, so I'm going to wager that they won't expel me, because I'm kind of the shit. So anyway, so the evening comes after dinner, and they're sort of just like milling around the common room waiting for everybody to go to sleep. And, of course, nobody's talking to them because they're still unpopular after all the points they've lost. And, it's mentioned that this is the first time that Harry's not been upset by the fact that he's basically ignored by everybody in his fucking house. And And so eventually everybody goes to bed, and Ron's like, all right, let's get the cloak then. And so they're getting ready to head out, and they are delayed, interrupted, because out of from behind an armchair, Neville comes out and attempts to stop them. Oh, Neville. But again, it's these kind of things that show us why Neville was sorted into Gryffindor, because he's a right coward in a lot of ways, but when it comes to like important shit, he actually makes like the brave decision. Like, this isn't something he wanted to do. He'd rather be in bed right now getting ready to go to sleep, or already asleep. But instead, he must have already like scouted them out and saw that they were like hanging out waiting for everybody to go to bed. And so he's like, no, you can't do this. You're going to get in trouble again. You're going to get Gryffindor in trouble again. It's not going to be good. Like, this shit is not going to go well. And of course, from Neville's point of view, he's 100% correct. But he doesn't really know the full story. And they ain't got time to tell him. And they're like, Neville, no. And Neville's like, but you told me to stand up to people. And Ron's like, yeah, but not us. Because, that's what Ron would say. Anyway, and he's like, I will fight you. And they're like, fuck. And Harry's like, Hermione, could you do something? Because, you're Hermione and you're the one who could do things, magically. And so Hermione hits him with the old full body bind, which becomes a somewhat a regular spell in the series. But this is our first time seeing the old Petrificus Totalis. And all of this plays out much more simply in the movie, by the way. I did do my pre-watch of the scenes that are in this chapter, and it everything is sort of simplified, which which makes sense to a certain degree, but it's like instead of the back and forth, it's like Neville shows up and then they're like, and then Hermione just hits him with the spell, and that's that. But in the book here, we have like the back and forth, and they're like irritated with him, but they understand, and then finally Harry asks Hermione to do something, and she does something. In the movie, Hermione just acts of her own volition. She's like, well, I guess this is what I'm going to need to do. Sorry, Neville. Anyway, the result is the same. Neville, his arms and legs snap down, and he falls on his back. And they're like, yeah, sorry about that, dude. We'll explain later. But, enjoy your time laying on the common room floor, which is kind of a crazy thing. Like, normally you'd want to like hide somebody or something, but I guess it is bedtime and nobody's really likely to creep back down and see Neville laying there on the floor. Anyway, so they head out under the cloak, and this is never mind that the invisibility cloak is the sort of the get out of jail free card for the whole series. The thing that allows Harry, Ron, and Hermione to move around in ways that they just couldn't otherwise, because they don't know how to do disillusionment charms yet. They haven't even heard of them yet. But somehow the cloak is big enough, I guess because it's an adult-sized cloak, and that's the main reason. The three of them are able to walk under it together undetected. How that exactly works is one of those things you just have to kind of let go, because it happens a lot. And granted, to Rowling's credit, at the very least, as they get a little bit older, like she does mention that it gets more difficult for the three of them all to be under there, and that eventually their shoes start to show and shit like that. But I guess 3 like 11-year-olds probably aren't that tall, and so it's kind of more plausible now anyway. But Right. So yeah. So they're moving about and they're getting. They're headed back to the place that they were just told they can't go back to. Of course. And they see Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat. In typical Ron fashion, he's like, "Can we just kick her, like, just this one time?" And Harry's like, "No, dude, come on. You really think that's going to go well?" So anyway, they head on and they get to where they're supposed to be, and then they almost get to where they're supposed to be. They're heading up the staircase to get to the third floor, and they see Peeves. Because hey, you got to have a little bit more potential trouble, but Harry has a little idea in his little brain box here, and he decides that he's gonna put on a little voice and impersonates the Bloody Baron, and somehow does a good enough job to fool Peeves, and he basically runs Peeves off. So Peeves doesn't prove to be a big obstacle, but he's like there as a potential obstacle. But anyway, yeah, the little ruse works, and Peeves is out of the way, and so now they in just a few more seconds they are outside the door, and lo and behold, the door was ajar. They're like, shit, Snape already got past Fluffy. So. And this is the first of many times that something like this happens too, where Harry's like, "All right, here we are at the thing. If you two want to go back, you can take the cloak. I don't need it. I can go on from here." And they're like, "Yeah, no, we're coming with. So let's do this." So they go in, and Fluffy's like awake and sniffing them out, even though how the fuck do you even call an animal with 3 heads? Like, it feels like it's a they, but I guess you could say it's a he or a she too. I don't know. I mean, it has 1 body, but it has 3 heads. That's like 3 brains, and so that's like feels like 3 entities. Anyway, Fluffy's sniffing because they're invisible and Fluffy can't see. I'm just going to try to use the name every time. That sounds better. In the movie version, by the way, things are a little bit simpler because even though there's a harp mentioned in the book here that was left behind, in the movie, the harp is still playing music. It's been like enchanted to just continue to like play music, which is, a legit solution for a dog that goes to sleep via music. An adult wizard would likely do that, so that makes sense. Here, there's a harp left behind, but it's not playing anything, so Harry has to pull out the flute that Hagrid gave him, which he had pocketed to take with him when he went and got the cloak. And he starts playing music, and as soon as he does, indeed, Fluffy does fall asleep. So, so they open the trapdoor, and there's a little bit of a discussion about who's going to go first, and Harry points at himself because he's playing, so he can't say anything. How exactly you point at yourself while you're playing a flute is a whole nother story, but anyway, so anyway, Harry does decide to go first, so he gives the flute to Hermione, and she starts playing. And even in just that little few seconds, the dog starts to growl and twitch, which, it's kind of an interesting thing because it's like this part of the plot becomes kind of like a game. And actually, I was watching a video about the Cursed Child yesterday, which, not even going to talk about how much that's annoying to me and how much I kind of just generally hate that. but the guy who reviewed it was like, you don't protect things with you protect things with protection, not with what did he say? Fuck. With tests, because that's sort of like what a lot of this ends up being, and this is like sort of a game kind of thing too. It's like if music puts the animal to sleep, sleep keeps an animal asleep once it's there, not the music stopping, in theory. But I guess if it's all like some sort of magical situation, then I guess the music is sort of a condition of keeping the animal asleep. But I'm like, what Fluffy doesn't sleep otherwise? Only when music's playing? What? I mean, shit has been guarding this whole fucking thing for a long time. Like, a nap seems like a good idea. And dogs are notoriously, like, all about sleeping. Anyway, whatever. So yeah, Harry goes down first, and they can't see anything in the hole. Like, it looks like it's just blackness below. So he lowers himself down, and then he drops, and he falls and falls, and then flump. Flump is a good word. It's flump is an onomatopoeia, is what flump is. It sounds like what happens, and so yeah, he hits a flump. He does a flumper. There's flumping going on, which means that he landed on something kind of soft. And he's like, it's some sort of plant. Very good. Flump indeed. And so he calls back up, yeah, it's good. Soft landing. And, of course, Ron jumps after that. And, of course, even though Harry hasn't moved, Ron lands on one side of Harry because fiction. And then Hermione jumps, and she lands on the other side of Harry because fiction. Which, by the way, another just to mention it because I just watched it. In the movie, as I mentioned, when they come in the room, the harp is playing, and they have to move one of Fluffy's paws to open the trapdoor, and then they're all sort of deciding what they're going to do and who's going to go first, and blah 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 blah. And then for reasons that make absolutely no sense in the movie, the harp just stops being enchanted and stops playing music. And so Fluffy wakes up and is sort of like... And so they all have to jump. And they're totally way slow on it. And especially Ron, who's last... For all intents and purposes, the way it's set up and the timing, Fluffy should have basically killed Ron. But that's neither here nor there because that's not how it happens in the book. So anyway, now they're all down there, and Ron's like, yeah, lucky this plant thing's here. And Hermione's like, lucky? Look at you. And they realize that this plant is in fact snaking around them and binding them to itself and making it where they can't stand up and can't do anything. But fortunately, Hermione leaps up immediately and is able to keep from being entrapped by this plant. And Hermione, of course, after a few seconds, recognizes the plant as Devil's Snare, which I don't think we're going to see again until Book 7. Devil's Snare, the murderer of Broderick Bode, if I'm not mistaken. Random, incredibly minor character, but whatever. And of course, Ron's like, that's great. You know what it's called. A+, Hermione. But of course, Hermione snaps back like, that's great and all, but shut up. I'm trying to figure out what I need to do here. And it's starting to get kind of desperate. And the movie version of this, which is so ridiculous, basically, the solution for how to get out of the devil snare is to just relax, which is stupid. And then, well, okay. So here, Hermione's like, what? Devil snare, what about it? Likes the damp and cold. And Harry's like, fire, shoot, do things with fire. And Hermione's like, yeah, but there's no wood. And we get one of my favorite lines that is reversed in book 3, I believe. Yeah, I'm definitely in book 3. And Ron's like, have you gone mad? Are you a witch or not? And Hermione's like, right. Point made, Mr. Weasley. And of course we learned earlier in the book that she can do these bluebell flames. So she does that, and the plant releases its grip on them, and they're able to get past it. In the movie, they sort of fall under it and then go on. But here, I think they're able to just get unraveled from the plant and then move on to the side, I guess, from like to a passage off from where they landed. Anyway, so yeah, then they come down a stone passageway, because of course they do, because they're underground in a castle. And right, so they move down the passage, and then they come upon another room, and they hear something. Well, actually, Ron hears something, because Ron is sort of like that one. Not always. Sometimes it's Harry, sometimes it's Hermione too, but Ron does often hear or see things first, and they hear what sounds like rustling, and they're like, huh. What do you think that is? And they're like, I don't know. But sounds like wings, kind of. So anyway, they get into the next room, and it appears that there are birds flying around up in the room. And they're afraid that when they try to cross the room, that the birds will like attack them or something. But so Harry runs across the room, and nothing happens. And tries to open the door on the other side of the room, but he can't. So the other two come in, and even with the Alohomora charm, the door will not open. And eventually Harry realizes that, oh, they're not birds, they're keys with wings. So they're like, great, there's like 100 keys flying around. Which one's going to open this door? I'm sorry, not just 100, hundreds. Anyway, and Ron, again, Mr. Practical, is like, well, we're probably looking for an old-fashioned one that's silver, like the handle on the door. And there are 3 broomsticks. Or maybe there's more than 3. Let's see, does it even say that? I don't suppose so. No. There are brooms, though, and they all get on brooms. Again, in the movie, it becomes a little bit more about Harry specifically. So there's one broom, and Harry jumps on it. And for whatever reason, in the way it works there, the keys sort of like kind of attack him and follow him and chase him, and he has to somehow, in the midst of all that, like capture the one that's the one he needs. Here, the keys just sort of fly around, and they have to they spot the one they're looking for, and they have to come up with a plan. And so Harry like has Ron and Hermione sort of like both come in from the top and the bottom, and then Harry like manages to chase down the key, because Harry's the seeker. And he of course catches it and pins it against a wall, and then let's see. And so they land, and they go to the door, and they open the door, and then the key flies back up. In the movie version, again with these keys chasing Harry around, he like grabs the key he needs, then he like tosses it somehow to Hermione, who then opens the door. And then they all open the door and stand inside, and Harry like flies through the door, and then they slam the door, and then all the keys sort of like fly into the door and like stick into it, which, if the previous person, who we know there was somebody that went through here before all this stuff before, if the previous person did the same thing, why weren't half the keys already like stuck in the door? But whatever. The book version is as always better. So anyway, they I mean, don't get me wrong, the movie version offers more danger. It just also creates additional plot holes and logic problems, but whatever. So anyway, they're like, all right, well, great, now what's next? And they come through the door, and they don't see anything at first, but then they realize as they step into it, light floods the room, and they're standing on the edge of a huge chessboard. And they're on the black side, the black pieces are on their side, and the white pieces are across. And of course, again, this is sort of Ron's real moment, because he's like, well, obviously we've got to play our way across the room. I mean, and again, I don't know, some things are like not really mirrored, but like are done in the movie and just in different ways. So again, I'll mention, there they just attempt to cross the room anyway, even though there's a chessboard, and all the pawns like have swords, and they sort of spring out and block the way. Here they kind of realize that they're not going to be able to go across the room in the first place, so Ron's like, yeah, we got to play. And of course Ron also realizes that they're going to need to each be a chessman. For whatever reason, in the movie, there were like a couple of blank spots already, so Harry and Hermione fill them. But whatever. That in the end, all three of them pick places, and I love, because Ron's like, all right, listen, no offense, but you guys kind of suck at chess. And they're like, no, that's okay. We're not offended. We just want to get across the room. You're the chess guy. It's cool. And so Ron places everybody, and Hermione's going to be a bishop. No, Harry is, and Hermione's going to be a castle, which is kind of funny because in book 7, there's mention of a rook, and Ron's like, oh, that doesn't look anything like a castle, but he doesn't say rook here, he says castle. Anyway, and Hermione is talking about a bird when she's talking about rook, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. And of course, and then Ron's like, me, I'm gonna be a knight, which is kind of great because, I mean, I know it's just a chess piece and it's just symbolic, but I don't know, it gives Ron sort of like is status the wrong word? Probably, but I don't know. It sort of exemplifies the Gryffindor thing. It's just like, I'm going to be the brave one here. Without really saying that, because, I mean, at the end of the day, his goal is just to win this chess game. It's not like he's like, I'm brave. This is just like the logically smart thing for him to do. But nonetheless, it's just kind of cool that Ron's going to be a knight. So anyway, but in the book here, not in the movie, the chess pieces are listening to Ron, and the three spots that he mentions that they're going to occupy, they vacate the board and leave spaces for them. And one thing that does happen in the movie that's kind of cute, kind of cool, whatever, is that Ron, even though the other two spaces are empty and Harry and Hermione go and fill them, for whatever reason, when Ron becomes a knight, he actually like sits astride like the black chess horse that the knight would be on. Somehow the knight itself is removed from or he's not on the. They don't really show that. Ron just is suddenly on the horse. But it's kind of a neat looking thing, even if it's a little bizarre because the horse is rearing. So it's like he's sitting astride the back of a horse that's not standing normally. It's like kind of upright almost, but somehow there's like a place in the back for him to sort of rest. Whatever. These details aren't really that important. Anyway, so the chess game begins, and a white pawn moves, and then Ron starts playing chess, because wizard's chess is something that Ron's been playing his whole life, basically, and he's good at it. So he does those things, and he directs Harry and Hermione as well. And anyway, yes, and the chess pieces, like just like in regular wizard's chess, the pieces basically bludgeon each other when they take when the pieces are taken, which adds a level of difficulty to the whole thing. Another thing, book or movie, regardless, what the fuck did the person who came through before them do? Did they not have to play? Were they able to subvert this part of the situation? Like, why aren't the, or did the or I mean, I guess we are shown later in the story and probably throughout the story that things can be magically repaired. Maybe all the pieces just sort of spring back together once you're done with this challenge or whatever. But anyway, again, it's a game, it's a challenge, it's not regular protection. It's like a cleverness protection, which is only would work for some people. So it is kind of an interesting thing to think about, because so far none of the things that had to be done, well, that's just it. They're things that have to be done. They're challenges, not just like, I mean, protection would be like a force field that you just fucking can't penetrate. That's not what these things are. Anyway, it makes for an interesting adventure nonetheless. So, anyway, so Ron's playing chess and everybody's cooperating, and of course, as we get to the end of the game, Ron realizes that the only way to win the game is for him to be taken by the Queen, so that Harry can move in and checkmate the king, or whatever, however the fuck you play chess. Yeah, that's what happens. And of course they're all like, no, you can't do that, Ron. Bah. And he's like, listen, we jumped down a trapdoor. We done came through all this shit already. Do you want to get to the fucking stone or not? And they're like, yeah, okay, fine. You're right. But fuck, you're gonna, what? Okay. So Ron's like, all right, this is how it's gonna go. This is what I'm gonna do. Here I am. I'm doing it. So Ron makes his move, and of course in the book, like I say, he's just standing there. He's not astride some empty stone horse. And when he does, the White Queen strikes Ron across the head with her stone arm, and he falls. Which that's okay. I'm just gonna bitch about movies for whatever reason, but when Ron's knight gets taken in the movie, the Queen stabs the stone horse in the side, and Ron falls off, and somehow just falling off the horse makes him unconscious. Which, the way it's done, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's almost like he was magically struck unconscious, not just that he fell and somehow that made him unconscious. I mean, I guess he could have bumped his head, but it just doesn't look that way. Here, he's fucking clouted across the head with a stone arm of a white chess piece, which does seem like the kind of thing that might give you a concussion or knock you out. So, it makes a little more sense. Anyway, and once that happens, Harry's able to make his move, and he does get the checkmate, and then, of course, the chessmen move out of the way and leave the way open. And they just leave Ron there. I mean, not just leave, but they're like, that's what we've got to do right now. Again, with the movie version, this is the moment where they're like, this is you, Harry, not us. You have to go on. And Hermione stays back with Ron, but which deprives her of her little trickery. Not trickery, but her intelligence playing a role in this whole thing. But anyway, here it does. And so they're like, all right, well, Ron's going to be okay, hopefully. So we've got to keep moving. So they go to the next chamber, and the next chamber, there was a troll, but the troll has been knocked out. Spoiler alert. But fortunately, they're like, okay, well, we don't have to do that. Troll's knocked out. Good deal. Next room. And as it turns out, the next room is where there is a table with 7 bottles on it. And so they're like, oh, okay. This must have been Snape's thing because, potions. Again, in this whole room, in the troll room, both of those are not in the movie. They're just skipped after Harry goes on by himself. Like, he just gets to what basically ends up being the end of this chapter. So, yeah. Anyway. And this turns out to just be basically not even a riddle so much as just a big-ass logic puzzle. And there's a note. Of course there is. And it explains, basically it breaks down which bottles are going to do what. One's going to let you go back, one's going to let you go forward, a couple of them will kill you, and a couple of them will do nothing, or something like that. Because I'm not going to read the whole fucking thing. But basically that's the gist. And Hermione's like, no problem. And Harry's like, really? No problem? Because this is kind of confusing. But it's a logic puzzle, and Hermione's got plenty of logic. So she reads it a couple times, and then she's like, all right, this one will take you forward, this one will take you back. And Harry's like, the one that'll take you forward is really only enough for one of us. And he's like, well, that's going to be me. So, because I'm Harry fucking Potter. And so he's like, all right, Hermione, drink the one to go back and go take care of Ron and send an owl to Dumbledore and blah, 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 blah. And so, yeah. And Hermione's like, oh, Harry. But, okay, she doesn't really do that. That doesn't do justice to Hermione at all. And Hermione's like, but what if, Voldemort's with this person, with Snape? Well, they're still thinking it's Snape. So, and Harry's like, well, I was lucky once. Maybe I'll be lucky again. And Hermione gives Harry a big hug, which he's not expecting. And she's like, gushes about him being a great wizard. And he's like, but I'm not as good as you. And she's like, oh, me? Books and cleverness? There are more important things. Which, she is right, but she's more than just books and cleverness. But anyway. And oh, Harry, be careful. Because, this whole thing is all about being careful, clearly. Anyway, so they drink their potions, and Hermione goes back, and Harry goes on. And yeah, and then and he goes through the flames, because that's the thing. When they entered that room, flames sprang up in both doors, the one forward and the one backward, and so they both have to drink the potions that allow them to pass through their respective flames safely. So Harry steps through his flames, and he's in the last chamber, and there's somebody already there. But it wasn't Snape. It wasn't even Voldemort. And that, my friends, is how that chapter ends. And I don't think that I managed to make this into the longest episode, which is nice. Although it's not the shortest one either. But since there were exams at the beginning of the chapter, I was able to, keep things out under control, because I was legitimately, okay, let me not say scared at all, but I was thinking that this might end up being the longest episode yet, and considering that some of them have been rather long, yeah, it could have gotten out of hand. But I don't feel like I overly abridged the abridging. So anyway, one chapter remains, and I'm gonna try to get to that as soon as feasibly possible. I got to get this one tidied up and uploaded, so by the time you hear this, it may be a day or so after I've recorded it, just because of internet things. But anyway, yeah, that's where we're at. We are almost done with this guy, and as I've mentioned before, the plan is to roll on into the Chamber of Secrets. So that's pretty much it. I can't think of anything else that needs to be said. Your likes and your comments are always appreciated. I love your comments. You guys often bring up things that I either missed or answer questions that I asked that I didn't have the answers for. So those things are always kind of awesome. Not kind of, they're very awesome, and I appreciate them. So yes, that will be that, and we will see you again very soon. And until then, peace.